Welcome to the Introduction to Conflict of Interest, or COI. This presentation is meant to provide a brief overview of COI at Appalachian State University. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to conflict of interest, what it is, what a conflict might look like, what our responsibilities are as employees of Appalachian State University, and to provide an overview of what steps and resources we have available. This presentation is approximately 12 minutes long. The mission of the university encompasses teaching, research, and scholarship. As employees of Appalachian State University, our primary interest is to fulfill the duties we were hired to do to support the university's mission. Conflict of interest is when a secondary influence, such as financial, relational, political, or personal interests, have the potential to affect a primary interest or purpose. At Appalachian and in the UNC system, the focus is on whether or not secondary interests can affect our ability to perform our duties as educators, researchers, or administrators. Note that I said potential. All of us have secondary interests to our jobs. A conflict of interest can happen when these interests have the potential to impact our primary responsibilities, our integrity, or our objectivity. Unfortunately, the appearance of a conflict can be just as impactful as an actual conflict, whether the actual conflict exists or not. So why is this important? Here is what our policy says. The bias that such conflicts may impart can affect many university duties, including decisions about personnel, the purchase of equipment and other supplies, the selection of instructional materials for classroom use, the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data, the sharing of research results, the choice of research protocols, the use of statistical methods, and the mentoring and judgment of student work. This list is not all-encompassing, but here are some common examples where either a conflict may exist or the perception of a conflict exists. A common source for potential or actual conflicts of interest is when you are conducting business outside your primary employment that is not related to your employment. Often this poses no actual conflict, but in some cases the line can be blurred between your duties as an employee and your private enterprise. The conflict arises when you act in dual and conflicting roles. For example, you cannot represent your private business or solicit clients in the same context in which you are representing App State. Likewise, you cannot solicit App State to hire your private enterprise. Sponsored research that uses technology you own in a private company also poses a potential for conflict. Another common conflict is when you and an immediate family member are both paid for work on an externally funded project. While there may not be an actual conflict of interest, steps must be taken to provide transparency to the sponsor and other project members. App State prohibits accepting gifts from a company in exchange for doing university work. This can lead to an expectation on the part of the company for favor, especially when it comes to research or contracts. Writing and advisory positions are encouraged by App State. However, when students are required to purchase materials you created, there is a conflict because you are being compensated for this activity. Sometimes service on an advisory board or board of trustees may create a potential for conflicts of interest if these organizations interact with the university. Compensation for this service or the ability to influence research or fiduciary outcomes may create a conflict of interest between your role and the interests of the university. And I should note that conflicts are not limited to individuals. Conflicts can happen at the institutional level also, such as when an entity is both a donor to the institution and a sponsor of research by the institution. While COI is a compliance requirement, I'd like to step back and look at the principles behind it. Consider that as employees of Appalachian, we have the duty to perform our responsibilities with the highest professional and ethical standards. We value integrity and objectivity in our roles as professionals, teachers, role models, and researchers. After all, we are in the business of education, and our students and North Carolina taxpayers expect nothing less but integrity in what we do. Sometimes we may find ourselves in a situation where it may appear that we may or could compromise our ability to fill our responsibilities at the highest standards. In these situations, transparency is how we deal with this potential conflict. Once others may perceive that we have a conflict of interest, it is our responsibility to address it, and the first step is disclosure. The UNC system policy is broad, and there are 3 opportunities for disclosures. First, all faculty and EHRA employees are required to disclose potential influences each year through the annual Conflict of Interest disclosure process. The disclosure period begins July 1 and ends October 1. This is done online through the Activities, Interests, and Relationships, or AIR management system. A link to the AIR system is found on the Research Protections website. Second, you may be required to complete a separate form called the External Professional Activities for Pay, or EPAP form. This is required because A, your primary employment is with App State, and B, you have another source of income through self-employment or another obligation. The purpose of the EPAP is to disclose this secondary obligation to your department chair, who can ascertain whether these obligations have an impact on your primary responsibilities at Appalachian. The point of the EPAP review is to have transparency and, if needed, to work out an arrangement that benefits you and the university. The EPAP form is also in the AIR system. Third, if you submit a grant proposal through sponsored programs, you may be required to complete a separate COI disclosure that is unique just to that project. If your project is PHS funded, any financial conflicts over $10,000 must be reported to the sponsor. There are other situations where a disclosure is needed. For example, if your research is under review by another oversight committee, such as the IRB, IACUC, or IP Council, the committee may request a conflict of interest review as part of their approval criteria. And then sometimes you may have a situation that arises before your next annual disclosure requirement, but isn't tied to a sponsored project. An example may be that you started a company recently or were offered a paid consultancy with an external entity. These types of situations may create a perception of or actual conflict with your responsibilities as an employee of App State. It is your responsibility to bring these forward, either to your department chair or the COI office. Sometimes the disclosure may require a management plan. The purpose of a management plan is to provide some safeguards to ensure objectivity in research or in your ability to carry out your job responsibilities. Common elements of management plans might include disclosing the conflict to the research team members, sponsors, or human subject participants. Disclosure may also be needed for publications or presentations. Assigning an unconflicted party for oversight of work done or payments made. If the conflict is spouse or immediate family members on a funded project, an unconflicted party may be assigned to serve as a neutral resource to bring forward concerns or complaints by students who are working on the project. Sometimes, if the conflict could affect objectivity in data collection or review, an unconflicted individual or review board may be required during the project or prior to submission for publication. In extreme cases, removal of the conflict is necessary. This may mean the conflicted individual must divest or resign from the situation creating the conflict, or remove him or herself from the project itself. Management plans must be agreed to and signed by all parties directly involved in the conflict and oversight, as well as department chairs and deans. There are activities that are prohibited by both App State's COI policy and the UNC system policy on conflicts of interest. In these situations, your secondary interests directly conflict with the primary interests of the university and your employment responsibilities. They cannot be managed, and conducting them could result in disciplinary action. Referring university business to an external enterprise where you or an immediate family member has a financial interest. Using university names so that you profit financially by trading on the university's goodwill or reputation. Using privileged university information acquired as an employee in an unauthorized way. signing agreements, or assigning university-owned intellectual property rights to a third party without approval, and any activity violating law or university policy. A sensitive area here involves intellectual property rights. If you have created or invented something as part of your employment at App State, the ownership of that IP needs to be determined before you enter into any outside agreements. Please refer to our intellectual property page for more information. The Conflict of Interest Council is comprised of faculty and EHRA staff and meet to review what are considered significant conflicts of interest. These are usually conflicts where a straightforward management plan is not possible, the conflict is at the institutional level, or the financial interests are greater than $5,000 in value. Per our policy, deans and the equivalent level of management or higher can request a COI review by the council. The council cannot create a management plan. Its charge is to affirm whether a conflict exists and whether it can be managed. To reach that determination, the council will review the situation and interview the relevant parties. These reviews are conducted in confidence, and the council provides the result of its review to the party who requested the review. Appalachian State has a policy for both conflicts of interest and the external professional activities for pay, and these provide considerably more detail than I've covered here. The UNC system has policies you can access as well. If you would like to learn more, we offer a COI module in our city subscription. Research Protections is also happy to visit your department or group to talk about conflicts of interest. We can provide a more comprehensive background and discussion. And of course, you can access all of these resources on our COI webpage. Thank you for reviewing conflicts of interest with us. We hope this has been informative.